problem of rough sleeping. Sharing time is Deputies Dessie Ellis and Richard Boyd Barrett. You have 2 minutes there.
Minister, I'd just like to first off express my sympathies to the family of Paul Doyle in Bray. Paul Doyle died of exposure in Bray in November last while sleeping rough, and also the man that was found in the Phoenix Park there who was sleeping rough, which possibly could be a case of murder as well. There are approximately 139 people found sleeping rough in Dublin in November 12, 2013. That's an increase of 45 in just 6 months. This figure doesn't include the hundreds in emergency accommodation every night with Peter McVerry Trust, giving shelter to a further 265 people. There's an increase of 18% in homeless in a year now at this stage. There's approximately 1,400 people in emergency accommodation every night in Dublin. Staff members of the Simon community recently told me that they are operating at absolute capacity, which is not enough, unfortunately, but also having a very damaging effect on the morale of the very good people who dedicate their time to the organisation and to the fight against homelessness. People are sleeping rough in cold and dangerous conditions. Not only do they have to fear exposure, but also they are very vulnerable to assault. Extra beds are in place as part of the cold weather initiative, but obviously this is not enough, as numbers have risen since the last count, which took place after last winter's initiative had ended. Homelessness and rough sleeping is going up at an alarming rate. This is the consequence of budget after budget, which took the easy targets and cut from the most vulnerable and the most basic services. The programme for government talked about alternative funding models for housing and social housing bonds, which have seen success in other states, raising billions across Europe. The government have done nothing on this, it would seem, but continually restate the promise of NAMA housing still undelivered and rehash old announcements and spin them as new funding. The Minister needs to seriously look at establishing semi-independent housing trusts through local authorities so that they can raise funds separate from the national debt. This has worked well elsewhere when capital funds were not available.
Thank you very much, Corla. Well, first of all, it may have escaped Deputy Boyd Barrett's notice, but I did announce €100 million in funding for the provision of social housing next year. A couple of days ago, and I'm glad to say that we're back into mainstream provision of social housing now, which wasn't possible not because of our policies, but because of the economic collapse of the country. And I just want to, first of all, in responding, I want to say that I can't comment on the specific circumstances surrounding the death of the man in Phoenix Park, which was referred to in one of the topical issues raised, but I do want to share with Deputy Ellis in terms of sympathy to the family of Paul Doyle and the man who very sadly lost his life in the Phoenix Park. The growing number of people sleeping rough in the streets of our capital city is unacceptable. The figures released today showing a marked increase in rough sleeping in Dublin are very troubling. Those in need of an emergency night's shelter must be provided for. I've noted the expansion of bed spaces under Dublin City Council's cold weather initiative, which has provided additional bed spaces since the 1st of November last. And indeed, Cathal Morgan, who was mentioned there, said that more than 80 beds have been provided in the Dublin area since the 1st of November. And I've been in contact with the City Council to ensure that more beds are being made available to tackle the situation, and I will provide any support that's needed in this immediate task. Homelessness is an affront to the dignity of the person and a stain in our society. It is a complex problem, but rough sleeping is the most extreme manifestation of it. The figures released by Dublin City Council show that 139 people are in this category, up from 94 in the spring of this year. This situation is unacceptable, but providing secure, warm accommodation on an emergency basis for 139 people is a problem that housing authorities should be able to address in conjunction with my department and the voluntary bodies working in this area. And just to give you a further figure, almost €23 million was spent on emergency accommodation in the Dublin region in 2013. So there is a considerable amount of money and a considerable amount of beds as well that are being provided, and the money that is being spent. And in fact, in the statement from the Dublin Regional Homeless Executive today, they say that on the night of the winter count there were 1,461 temporary beds in the Dublin region. Emergency accommodation, though, is not a viable long-term solution to homelessness. The Government's homeless policy statement, which I published earlier this year, emphasises a housing-led approach to homelessness, which is about accessing permanent housing as the primary response to all forms of homelessness. My priority is to ensure that homeless people have access to secure, stable, appropriate accommodation. And in Dublin last year, more than 870 people moved from homeless services to permanent housing. And this year we anticipate that that figure will be over 900. The Government is committed to innovative, practical solutions to resolve long-term homelessness. These include initiatives such as the Social Impact Initiative announced in Budget 2014, which will see 136 families moved from extremely expensive long-term emergency accommodation to permanent homes supported by a voluntary body. The Housing First pilot in Dublin has placed 24 entrenched rough sleepers in permanent housing, where they are offered the necessary services to maintain their housing. And a rent supplement initiative in conjunction with the Department of Social Protection offers homeless households in Dublin an additional opportunity to avoid or escape homelessness. And I just want to stress that there are specifically some community welfare officers who are assigned specifically to homeless people to address that issue that you raised, Deputy Boyd-Barrett, about the caps. And we're working very closely with the Dublin authorities in particular, where the problem is most acute, in terms of addressing the issues. And it is complex. It does need a mixture of responses, and Deputy Ellis has suggested one which certainly we're open to consideration on. And in fact, there is nothing to impede local authorities from setting up their own housing associations. And we work very closely with bodies like that you mentioned, Peter McVerry Trust, Simon, and that, they are doing tremendous work, and I'd like to commend them for the work they're doing in this area.
Thank you. Deputy Ellis, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, do you accept at this stage that the plan to end homelessness by 2016 now is literally a fairy tale? Because the present rate and the present rate we're seeing people in homeless and a report to homeless now is suggesting that. Do you also accept that the whole idea of rental supplement and RAS is not working, and that building and providing proper social housing is the only answer? There are a number of reasons why we're seeing these huge increases in homelessness. One of them is the lack of private rented accommodation, and also landlords who are looking at people who are in rent and supplement and RAS, and they are looking to put people out over whether it's €100 extra, €50 or whatever. And this is pushing people into homelessness because they can't get another private rental subsidy anywhere. And we have people in RAS in the same boat. We were told that people in RAS were as good as housed and would not be put out, and we are now finding they are reporting to homelessness. So there are two very good reasons why the homeless figures are going through the roof, and that's going to continue unless something radically changes.
Yourself, please.
I gave you the statistics already about the number of beds that are available for emergency purposes. Already an extra 80 since the 1st of November. I told you the number of people who've moved on into permanent accommodation. I've told you that I announced at the weekend a figure of €100 million next year for the construction of houses. Now, with regard to the issue around the rent supplement, first of all, my colleague, Minister Joan Burton, did improve the rent caps in the Dublin area earlier this year. We have a commitment in the programme for government, which we will be implementing next year, to transfer to a payment called HAP, which will get away from rent supplement, except for short-term measures, that all long-term rent supplement people will be transferred to a system of payment whereby they will pay the same as if they were a local authority tenant. We are making progress on that as well, and we will start transitioning it in 2014. I have already given you various statistics in relation to what we're doing, and again I would say that the voluntary sector, we're working very closely with them, and they are helping us to provide accommodation, and particularly the support for the housing-led approach, which is the ultimate solution, because if people continue to stay in emergency accommodation when they're ready to move on and when they should be moving on into long-term accommodation, then there aren't beds available for the real emergencies that arise every day of the week. So we have a programme, we have an implementation plan, and we are supporting people to move into homes, which is called a housing-led approach, and that's been shown to be the way. And I'm absolutely committed, Deputy Ellis, to reaching reaching the goal of ending long-term homelessness by 2016. Now, we won't do that by doing things the same as we've always done them. That's why we're changing the way we're doing things. That's why I have an oversight group who are going to be reporting to me in the next week with very specific proposals around what we need to change in order to achieve that goal. And one of the things we need to do is to move people out of emergency accommodation into homes with support and with the kind of, if they have addiction problems, whatever they have, with the kind of supports they need, so that where there are emergencies, then there will be spaces available in the emergency hostels for the people who have emergencies. But we are working in a whole variety of areas on this issue. None of us want to see anybody sleeping rough or anybody out in the cold weather. But I would pay tribute to the Dublin Regional Homeless Executive, because they are taking very strong action with regard to this, and they are successful in much of what they're doing. There is still more to do, and I do acknowledge that. And the provision of housing is one of those areas that we want to increase now that the economy has started to turn around. We want to increase, and we will increase, and we've started already, the supply of social housing.
Item number 3.